Okay, stop what you are doing because what just happened between Canada and the United States is not a normal political argument. This is the kind of thing that actually changes how two countries deal with each other for the next decade. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, just walked onto a global stage and delivered one of the sharpest, most deliberate attacks on Donald Trump's trade policy that we have seen from a sitting allied leader in modern memory. He didn't hedge it, he didn't soften it, he called Trump's tariffs a throwback to Great Depression era thinking. And then he said, and I want you to hear this clearly, he said that depending on America is now caught a strategic liability for Canada. This is a sitting G7 leader, your closest neighbor, your longest trade partner, standing up in front of the world and saying, we can no longer count on the United States. So the alliance is crumbling, and this is the brutal reality check that nobody in mainstream media is giving you the full picture on. So let's actually dig into it right now. What's up, guys? I'm Frank John, and you are watching your favorite channel, Joshu Reactions. Here's my deal: I don't sugarcoat things, I don't push an agenda, I bring you the facts that mainstream media glosses over. And I help you to figure out what they actually mean for your real life. Today, that means we are breaking down something that is way bigger than the headlines are giving it credit for. Canada, the country that shares the longest peaceful border in the world with the US, the country that has been America's #1 trade partner for decades, is openly, publicly signaling that it is pivoting away from Washington, D.C. This isn't a political spat. This isn't just politicians throwing shade at each other on the internet. This is a structural economic rupture, and if you want to understand how global trade is being weaponized right now between two countries that were basically best friends 6 months ago, you need to stick around for this one. If you are new here, hit subscribe right now. We do this kind for deep dive breakdown all the time. All right, let's get into it. All right, chapter 1, the end of the good old days. For a very long time, the US Canada relationship was almost boring, and I mean that is the best possible way. Shared borders, shared culture, shared values, and a trade relationship worth over $1 trillion a year. Most Canadians, honestly, most Americans too, just assumed that no matters what happened politically, those two countries would always find their way back to business as usual. Mark Carney just told them to let go for that idea. His exact words were this: nostalgia is not a strategy. And look, that is a loaded statement when you actually sit with it. He's not just commenting on a trade deal, he's saying something much deeper. He's saying the version of America that Canada built its entire economy model around. The reliable partner, the open market, the stable neighbor, that version may not exist in the same way anymore. Here's the specific thing Carney pointed to: Trump's tariff policy. And he didn't frame it as a minor disagreement. He framed it as a signal that United States is now willing to use economy pain as a weapon against its own allies if it benefits domestic politics. Think about what that means for Canada's perspective. You have spent 50, 60, 70 years building your factories, your energy sector, your supply chains to serve American markets, and suddenly your biggest customer starts slapping tariffs on your goods. Not because you did anything wrong, but because it plays well in a speech. That would make any rational business leader say, wait a second, we need to rethink this. And Carney, who, by the way, ran the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England before getting into politics, is about as rational a business thinker as they come. He's not being emotional, he's doing the math, and the math is telling him depending on one partner for the majority of your trade is a vulnerability, not a strength. Now, whether you agree with how he framing America's role or not, the core argument he's making is actually hard to argue with from a pure economist standpoint. If your biggest trading partner starts treating you like competition instead of a partner, waiting and hoping things go back to normal is not a strategy, adapting is. And that is exactly what Canada says it's going to do. The tariffs that started it all. Chapter 2, Weaponizing Trade. Here's where it gets really specific and where Carney started being diplomatic. The core of his criticism is aimed directly at Trump's tariff strategy, and the comparison he chose what was not subtle. He said these tariffs echo the kind of protectionist economic thinking that made the Great Depression worse, not better, worse. Now, that is a serious historical reference. He is not saying I disagree with this policy. He is saying history has already shown us where this road goes, and it does not end well for anyone. The Smooth Hallway Tariff Act of 1930 is the classic case study here. The US raised tariffs to protect domestic industry, other countries retailed it, global trade collapsed, and the Great Depression deepened. Economists are pretty much unanimous that those tariffs made a bad situation catastrophic. Carney is essentially saying we are watching the same movie again. Now, I'm not here to tell you whether that comparison is fair or not. Smart economists on both sides of the border disagree. But what I will tell you is this: when a G7 leader starts invoking the Great Depression to describe the trade policy of their biggest ally, that is not normal. That is a major escalation. The Canada Strong strategy, nearly $1 trillion. So, what is Canada actually doing about it? Because Carney isn't just talking, he has laid out what he's calling a strong strategy, and the numbers behind it are genuinely staggering. We are talking about Canada mobilizing nearly $1 trillion toward reducing its economy dependence on the United States. That includes diversifying trade routes, building new relationships with European and Asian markets, and investing heavily in domestic infrastructure and production capacity. Let me put that in perspective. Canada's entire annual GDP is roughly $2.2 trillion. So, we are talking about a strategic investment equivalent to nearly half of the economy, all aimed at making Canada less reliant on one country. That's not a policy tweak. That is a fundamental rethinking of how an entire country operates economically. That is the kind of decision that takes years to execute, but the fact that it's even being discussed at this level tells you how seriously Ottawa is taking the current situation. Why Americans and Canadians both need to pay attention. And here's the part that I think gets overlooked when people in the US hear this story. This is not just a Canadian problem, not even close. There are American states that rely heavily on Canadian energy, states that have supply chains completely intertwined with Canadian manufacturing industries, auto, steel, agriculture, lumber that run on cross border relationships built over generations. If Canada starts seriously rerouting where it sends its exports, if it starts buying more from Europe and Asia and selling more there too, that creates a vacuum in the American market. And vacuums don't just disappear, they get filled by someone else, or they create shortage, or they drive up costs. Think about energy specifically. Canada is the one of the biggest suppliers of oil to the United States. If Canada decides it wants to build more pipelines toward its own coasts and sell to Asian markets instead, that has a direct impact on American energy supply, which has a direct impact on gas prices, which hits every single person in this country every time they filled up their tank. So, this is not just Ottawa politics, this is real, and it is coming whether people are paying attention or not. The bottom line. All right, here is where we land. The era of Canada quietly following America's economy lead of assuming the relationship will always smooth itself out. That era is over, at least for now. Mark Carney is making a very public, very deliberate bet that Canada can chart its own path, that it can diversify fast enough, build new partnerships strong enough, and invest at home boldly enough to protect Canadian jobs and Canadian livelihoods, even if the relationship with Washington stays rocky. That is a massive gamble. It is the one of the biggest economy pivots any of Canada's G7 partners has ever attempted, and the outcome is genuinely uncertain. Can Canada actually pull it off? Can a country that has been the economically connected to the US for this long successfully decouple fast enough to protect its people without causing serious short-term pain? Inflation, job losses, supply disruptions, those are all real risk in a poverty this big. I genuinely don't have a clean answer to that, and I think anyone who tells you they do on any side of this is oversimplifying it. What I do now is this: the shift is real, it's happening right now, and it is going to have consequences on both sides of the border, whether we are ready for them or not. Drop a comment, I want hear from you. So here's my question for you, and I actually want your real take in the comments. Can Canada thrive by pulling back from the US economy? Or is this a move that ultimately going to hurt Canadians more than it hurts Washington? Because I have seen both arguments made seriously by smart people, and I think it is genuinely a close call. Drop it down below. It's actually have the conversation. If you got something real out of this video, if it helped you understand something that news wasn't explaining clearly, do me a favor, like the video and share it with one person who needs that context. That's honestly the biggest thing you can do to help this channel keep doing this work. I am Frank John. This was Joshu Reactions. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay informed. Talk soon. Take care. Bye bye.